All right, hi, my name is Alexei Morrow, and last August we went out to Ngogo, Kibale National Park in Uganda, and collected urine from chimpanzees, 20 chimpanzees to be exact, and looked at, assayed, did a test of their urine for a metabolite of ethanol called ethyl glucuronide that's produced in the liver, and we found widespread physiological evidence of the consumption of ethanol by chimpanzees. And so I'm going to talk about that and give you a little bit of background to start. So the main underlying sort of thing to understand here is that human ancestral diet is frugivorous, as evidenced by all of the great apes today being primarily frugivores, as in they consume more than half of their diet in fruit, except for the mountain gorilla, which lives at high elevations where fruit doesn't grow, so they eat underground tubers instead, which is still carbohydrate storage tissue, I would argue. But yeah, so it's likely, more than likely, that the ancestral human was a fruit eater, and it made my PhD advisor Robert Dudley wonder 20 years ago whether the alcohol from fermentation in the fruit might not be connected somehow to the attraction by humans today to alcohol, and hypothesized that alcoholism is then some kind of an evolutionary mismatch, likely of the dosage. And this is in the context of evolutionary medicine, where sort of a lot of diseases tend to have some kind of evolutionary forces at work that we can investigate, and sometimes they even have some kind of ecological, historical reasons. And so this is sort of part of that. And in 2014, he published this book, the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis, or the Evolutionary Hangover Hypothesis, as it's otherwise known. And I'm not going to go too much more into it. There's a lot more, about what the yeasts are doing and all that. But as far as background, it's sufficient to sort of think of it as a ecological system of mutualisms, right? So here's a paranthropus eating fruit. And so if you think of the frugivore, or chimpanzee in our case, consuming the fruit, and we know very well established that they get calories from the fruit and in exchange provide the mutualistic service of seed dispersal for the fruit. The farther away the seed is taken from the tree, the likelier it is to survive and reproduce, and so it's good for the fruit. And in recent years, the silent third partner, the microbiome, has become very preeminent in the literature, and we know that virtually every system is mediated to some degree by microbes. And so part of that is this hypothesis that yeasts are among the microbes, also along with molds and bacteria within fruit, but that yeasts in particular behave mutualistically, and they derive calories from the fruit and a place to grow and live, and in exchange compete with spoilage microbes and provide a kind of antimicrobial defense, also through fermentation and through the production of ethanol, which also happens to provide an olfactory signal to the fruit eaters when the ethanol, which is a very small molecule, escapes the fruit and provides an indirect service to the fruit by attracting seed dispersers. And so that's the hypothesized mutualistic relationship. And my sort of PhD quest was to go and look and see if there are alcohol concentrations in the fruits that the chimpanzees were eating, and to see if it's possible to sort of estimate how much alcohol they can consume based on the preponderance of data in the literature that exists on the specific communities I was studying. But before we get into that, right, uh, alcohol is kind of this mysterious, fascinating molecule, right, as we see. And it's more maybe than just an olfactory signal, right? There's also, over the years, there's been this kind of association with, or this question of, is a little bit of alcohol actually good for your health? People tend to eat uh, food with alcohol, and that has its own sort of uh, associations. But here we see a study that actually did a meta-analysis and showed that indeed it appears as though humans have a lower risk of total mortality relative to abstinence if they consume small amounts of alcohol, up to 2 to 4 drinks, depending on sex here. And this has been widely disputed and argued about in the years since. People have argued that if you can separate out abstainers, lifetime abstainers, from people that have had bad experiences with alcohol and now no longer consume it, and that those are two very different groups, and that there's statistical things, but it's gone back and forth over the years, and this still appears to be relatively this emerges from the data at times, and specifically in relation to cardiovascular health, where it appears as though coronary heart disease and cardiovascular deaths are fewer from light to moderate drinking than they are in non-drinkers or heavy drinkers. And this is also called the hormetic effect, similar to, say, salt, where a lot of salt is bad for you, but no salt is also bad for you, so there's like just the right amount. Of course, alcohol isn't as essential as salt, but it follows a similar kind of pattern. And then on the other side, there is the question of, does alcohol cause cancer? And the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General, in a 2020 study dating to 2020, that even a small amount of drinks per day can cause cancer. And that was all reviewed the same year, late last year, by the National Academy of Science in their review of evidence on alcohol and health. And they weighed both sides of the evidence, and they found that on the basis of meta-analysis of 8 studies, there was indeed a 16% lower risk of all-cause mortality, about what you see in this graph, compared to those who never consumed alcohol. And so that is the back and forth can continue being back and forth. And then for cancer, it also found that indeed, in this example, 10% higher risk of breast cancer for those consuming moderate amounts of alcohol. But there are some concerns with the bias in the studies. And but both these aren't mutually exclusive. And it very well may be that within the total risk of total mortality, it absorbs this antagonistic danger of cancer, for many reasons. And again, I'm not going to get into all of it, but the social reasons are also a big part of it. So on to the field work, right? Here's a map of the 4 subspecies of chimpanzees and the bonobos down here. And I was studying the eastern chimpanzees in their easternmost range in Ngorongoro, Kibale National Park, Uganda. And this is the previous work that I did looking at fruits, but this is also the site that I returned to for the current study in 2025. And then I also compared it to Western chimpanzees, which were in Thai National Park, Ivory Coast. And they were once thought to be even a separate species of chimpanzees, since the comparison is very interesting and necessary, I would argue. And so this came out in Science Advances last September, where I assayed all these fruits using a variety of methods that you can read about. And here's fruits in gray are highlighted, are from Thai. And so you have your #1 fruit here consumed by chimpanzees at Thai. They spent the most time of the year feeding on this fruit, Parinaria excelsa. And then you have Ficus mucuso, the #1 most consumed 18% of the time they're foraging during the year at Ngorongoro. And you see both of these are higher than sort of the average among species. But I also was interested to see, if this value 0.3%, if it can be used to estimate dosage. And indeed, this comes out to, if you say chimpanzees consume 4.5 kilograms of fruit pulp per day and weigh, I think it was around 40 kilograms, then those 14 grams of pure ethanol come out to about 1 to 2 standard drinks, depending on whether you correct for body mass. 14 grams of pure ethanol per day diet, on average over the year, sometimes higher, sometimes lower. And this is sort of where I left it off last time. So then had this opportunity to go and do a number of pilot studies because there was this German documentary crew filming a documentary series called Wild on a High, Tierbrauch. And they they had some last minute changes and they wanted to film me doing research at a field site doing the work that I would normally be doing. And so I came up with a number of quick pilot studies of things that I wanted to, that were sort of loose ends that I wanted to try out. And we went out there, and here's the camera crew, Philip and Moritz, and they were lugging around this camera and getting these fantastic shots. And so I'm going to roll a 2-minute clip from that. It came out in Germany in December, but the international version is coming out in April, so this is not out yet. I translated the lyrics and hard-coded some subtitles, so you'll see it's doesn't quite match the dub things, but it's the footage is fantastic and it explains kind of what's going on. Some of which is that when we got there, right, we were very fortunate because we had a very narrow window of time, and I was prepared for a lot of contingencies. And we were very fortunate because while we were in the 7-day quarantine period, we found out that there is this fruit called the African star apple, which was mast fruiting. It goes off every 2 to 3 years, right? So it's not a seasonal fruiter. Every 2 to 3 years, all of these trees produce fruit simultaneously. And it's supposed to overwhelm seed predators that normally if only one tree is producing fruits at a time, the seed predators will eat the seeds before they can be dispersed. In this way, it overwhelms, it saturates the seed predators so all the seed dispersers can do their thing. And so it's this like big glut of food for the chimpanzees, this high caloric boost. And it made it a very straightforward study because that's almost exclusively what both communities were eating the entire time we were there. And so here's this 2-minute clip.
Das erste Mal seit Jahren hängen die Bäume wieder voller afrikanischer Sternäpfel. Süße Früchte mit einer besonderen Eigenschaft. Schimpansen verspeisen pro Tag rund 4,5 Kilogramm Früchte. Und nach den saftigen, orange-gelben Kugeln sind sie regelrecht süchtig.
Schimpansen sind, nun ja, wie bei allen Tieren, dreht sich auch bei ihnen alles um das richtige Timing, wenn es um die Nahrungsaufnahme geht. Wie viele Kalorien kann man zu sich nehmen und wie schnell? Es ist faszinierend, sie sind wahnsinnig schnell. Enthalten die Früchte Alkohol? Das ist die Frage aller Fragen.
Nahrungsaufnahme mit Nebeneffekt? Alexei will die Tiere testen. Was oben reinkommt, muss irgendwann auch unten wieder raus.
Bereit zum Urinprobe sammeln. Einfach ein anderer Weg für dieselbe Frage. Konsumieren Schimpansen über die Früchte Alkohol? Das ist Miles. Er ist sehr alt und ein charismatischer Schimpanse.
Sehr charismatisch.
Wir haben Miles. Sein Urin. Dieser Test zeigt eindeutig, dass Miles in den letzten 80 Stunden regelmäßig ausreichend Ethanol konsumiert hat, um positiv zu sein.
Okay, so here is a GIF of me. I sprayed some water on leaves and pipetted them up, and kind of this is sped up here, showing what it looks like when you do this assay. So you pipette some urine from the leaves, maybe just a few drops, right? If it's not been raining. And then here's the absorbent side of the assay, right? You see this flat side doesn't absorb, but it's the narrow sides that absorb the liquid. And so it only takes a couple drops. And right in the field are, as soon as the animal's urinated, you could put it on the side of this thing and you'll see the fluid moving in across the window here. And then there's two lines that appear if it's negative, right? So this is just water. And there's a little here, you can interpret this. It's negative if there's two lines and there's a control line. And if the line is completely gone, it's positive, right? So even if the line's faded, it's still negative. And so here is an example of that. So I had, these are the results, right? There were two assays at a cutoff of 300 nanograms per milliliter of ethyl glucuronide or 500 nanograms per milliliter of ethyl glucuronide. Due to some logistical issues with the last minute field work, I got the wrong box of tests and I had only 11 assays at the 500 cutoff. There were 12. I tested one of myself. I left 11. And then I had as many 300s as we could collect. So we had 20 chimpanzee urine samples, which is amazing, given that we only had 11 days in the field after quarantine and even fewer days than that to collect urine. And out of those, at the 300 cutoff, 3 were negative and the vast majority were positive, male and female included. And then those 3 that were negative at the 300 carried over. And at the 500 cutoff, out of the 11, only 1 was negative. So that one passed 300, but was negative at 500. So that chimpanzee was between 300 and 500. See, you could use multiple cutoffs to actually narrow down the concentration of ethyl glucuronide in the urine, right? And the reason ethyl glucuronide, I don't know if I forgot to mention this, is even in the urine is that it's just a minor metabolic pathway, less than 1%. And the same goes for ethyl sulfate. And actually, here's a graph, right, of from a study in '07 where 2 individuals, one consuming 3.5 drinks, one consuming 5.5 drinks. I sort of stretched this out so that they scale the same and are comparable. And you see the ethyl sulfate and ethyl glucuronide is orange here for some reason, but it's pink here for some reason. I don't know what was going on there. But you see that the blood alcohol goes up as you consume this liquid alcohol in a span of 15 minutes, right? It shoots up, and then the serum ethyl glucuronide increases accordingly over time, and then it concentrates in the bladder and is expelled in the urine. So here's a study where there were about 13 social drinkers, volunteers, that consumed 1 to 2 standard drinks based on their body size that came out to 0.12 to 0.32 grams per kilogram. So 0.14 is 1 standard drink for a 70 kilogram human, right? So they consumed 1 to 2 drinks. And after 24 hours, none of them passed the 500 nanogram per milliliter cutoff, which, is, that's great. And that's what that's saying is that there was unambiguously some alcohol consumption. Of course, chimpanzees consume alcohol very differently, right? They consume alcohol throughout the day rather than in a single go, right? They wake up in the morning and they eat, and then they go off and do something, and then they eat, and then sometimes, depending on the community, they'll eat a third time or on the situation. And so there's sort of more of an even dosage rather than this big spike that we see. And it's accompanied by food, right? So this would be high carb, and humans, the alcohol elimination rate's much faster as opposed to just drinking liquid alcohol. And so all of that together makes it so that it's likely that chimpanzees require more alcohol in their diet to actually pass the same cutoffs as a human, right? And there's also something called the first pass metabolism, where if you're consuming alcohol, it get eliminated by enzymes in the esophagus and stomach. And so if you're consuming it with food, it sort of blocks the passage from the stomach to the intestines, giving more time for that first pass metabolism to work on the alcohol. And so future studies with humans, if they want to be comparable to, say, chimpanzees, that would be there would be that kind of study hasn't been done in humans. And then I also went out and assayed the fruits themselves of a total of 9 crops here. Each one is a different crop. And crop 2 and 3, I re-assayed at the end because these last for a while. And the chimpanzees, sometimes, a lot of these crops are kind of clustered together, right? There'll be trees in the same geographic area, and they're associated with elephants, so they're oftentimes kind of cleared out. Elephants come when this fruit is in season. Savanna elephants from really far away come because they somehow know. And so there's these crops last for a long time, and chimpanzees will feed and then go and eat in a different one and then come back a week later and feed on it again. There's not enough statistical power here to really make any more conclusions other than to say that there is alcohol in the fruits that the chimpanzees were consuming. And it was recorded using the same method as in the previous study as one of them, which this magic wand that has this sort of industrial for the detection of solvent vapors sensor embedded in this kind of screen, right? And you take the fruit pulp and homogenize it and put a certain amount in the bottom of a centrifuge tube, and then you put it in there and expose it to the vapors, and the voltage changes over time, right? There's a metal oxide semiconductor layer in there that it interacts with the volatile vapors, changes its electrical conductivity, right? Amazing. And you calibrate it using water and ethanol and the same thing, and you get these concentrations. And before, I actually have this exact same species in here, Chrysophyllum albidum. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. It got renamed Gambia albida, and this was not when the fruits weren't mastic. So occasionally, this species, one individual will go off and produce some fruits, and the chimpanzees will eat a few. It's called scrumping. They'll eat it off the ground opportunistically, and it's not really a big deal. And those were actually at higher alcohol concentrations than what we were seeing out here. But this just sort of underscores the point that, well, they're eating these fruits incredibly fast, right? And they're all fruiting at the same time. And so there's just like a limitless amount of food for them. And so you have to look at not just the alcohol in the fruits, but you also look at how fast the chimpanzees are eating the fruits, as well as looking at this metabolite in their urine, which is sort of a proxy for blood alcohol concentration, right? We can't breathalyze wild animals, but if we can get their urine, as we can see, this is good for about 24 hours, right? 24 to 48 hours. It tapers off slowly. And this is applicable to any animal that consumes fruit. These are all camera-trapped animals from the first round of studies that were eating the same fruits that I assayed, and any one of them, they all urinate, except the birds, right? The birds, they do something different, but their feathers have been assayed for ethylglucuronide, because just like human hair and nails, which also sequester ethylglucuronide in them, they can be analyzed the same way, even progressively over time, right? You could take a segment of hair and sequence it over time. And the same can even be done with reptile scales. They all derive from the same physiological process. And this is only one species of fruit, right? You could do this with just chimpanzees, or just one species over time, and say, look at it for this fruit, then the following week they switch to a different fruit, and you could see, are they actually getting the physiological amount of alcohol that you expect them to based on ethanol concentrations, right? Or, is there something else going on? And the way you can triangulate and see if things add up. And you can do this for a lot of animals. I know there's right now somebody using this assay method in Kenya and also so in Madagascar with bats. And the reason is that it's really, really convenient. I'm going to rewind here again a little bit. As you can see, it's really similar to like a COVID rapid assay test or a pregnancy test when you interpret these lines. And it's an immunoassay. So there's, it's a very well-known, well-established method that's been validated in the literature and uses clonal antibodies that are like stuck on this kind of substrate. So it's very handy, very portable in the field. There's a lot of studies that can be done using this method. I also went out there and I did some climbing, right? And the interest there is that in the crown of the tree, we know that fruits tend to be more sweet and larger than fruits lower down in the canopy. And that larger bodied primates tend to compete for the fruits, the more preferred fruits in the upper part of the canopy. And when there's two primates of different body sizes, the larger bodied one, chimpanzees, that's why they're big, they keep the monkeys away from the good fruits, and the monkeys eat the less desirable fruits lower in the tree, and that's why monkeys also eat a lot more unripe fruit. So just beating chimpanzees to the chase for the lower quality stuff. So there's this kind of competition, and it'd be interesting to see how ethanol fits into how all that plays out. I'd expect higher alcohol in the upper canopy than in the lower canopy. But as you'll see in the documentary when it comes out in April, right, I wasn't able to do that because as I was at this point in the tree, the chimpanzees started making calls and they were returning to the fruit crop. Right, the vagaries of having 11 days in the field to do this. So I wasn't able to actually go up there and sample that. Fortunately, the chimpanzees, they shake the tree branches a lot, so the fruits we were getting were raining down, and they're very likely a sample sort of what's up there. And when the fruit's ready to detach, that means it's fairly ripe. So that's reassuring. And then the other thing that was really interesting in this pilot study that I did at the same time as all this other stuff is I tried to isolate some microbes, right? And I had this sterile box for, marketed for doing mushroom stuff with mushroom spores, and I got this little portable HEPA filter in here that you run for 20 minutes, turn it off for 20 minutes. There's an ethanol candle, and I made agar. This is some tryptic soy agar, but I also use fruit agar made from the star apple fruits boiled down, and you pour them in a plate and culture it. And I didn't do it systematically enough to publish anything, but these specks here, these are budding yeast, right? I brought a compound microscope out there and everything. And this is budding yeast. So we know that the alcohol is in the fruits, and you can see there's all kinds of other stuff in there too, right? Sometimes it's just one thing, but a lot of times the fruit is not populated by just one thing. And another big missing variable in all of this is the insects, right? There have been insects are vectors for microbes, and I personally think that they're probably the vectors for fruit specialists like these budding yeasts. And so if there's so many fruits that they're saturating the whole forest, the insects might not be able to keep up. And then when they do, they might make the fruits have higher rates of fermentation because they make holes and introduce all kinds of microbes. So there's this whole ecological world that hasn't been looked at. And then it all comes back around to the human side, right? How were we evolved and predisposed to the consumption of alcohol based on this ancestral lineage? And then how did that then predispose us to the domestication of alcohol via brewer's yeast, which is a budding yeast? And I'm interested in that whole side of things as well. Looking for a postdoc right now, so if you're seeing this right away and this sounds good, shoot me an email. And thank you for listening. And yeah, that's the talk.